5.
This was the most extraordinary overreach and state intrusion into my private life, and I don't think I did anything wrong, and I think their response was outrageous.
4.
I think it fell very neatly into, oh look, and we can make an example of people.
3.
Young men voted for Trump in big numbers. He won the popular vote and he won the White House. And very, very few Republican presidents have done that in recent history.
2.
I'm sufficiently old-fashioned to think the journalist should never become the story, but needs must.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. Great to have you back, co-pilot. And what a week to return. Because as we speak, the top story on the Telegraph in print and online is you, Allison Pearson. Not a piece of writing by Allison Pearson, nor a news story penned by Allison Pearson, but the case of Allison Pearson. Following a doorstep visit to your home on Remembrance Sunday by the local Essex Police Constabulary. That means the Allison Pearson episode is, in news terms, now seen as more important than the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury, than the latest from the Middle East. But more on that later. Because it's also a week when Labour's plans to slap an effective rate of 20% inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million, those plans are in danger of unravelling, as some of Britain's generally mild-mannered, ruddy-cheeked farmers have really got their blood up, threatening French-style mass protests, and even the withholding of food supplies, unless Chancellor Rachel Reeves reconsiders. Plus, it's a week since Donald Trump won re-election. The 78-year-old president-elect, who gets the keys to the White House in January, has given no press conferences nor speeches. Instead, he's been behind closed doors at Mar-a-Lago, his private club in Florida, where he's working the phones, reconnecting with foreign leaders and building his new administration. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, whose companies have billions of dollars in federal contracts, by the way, has been a constant presence and is now a member of Trump's administration. And Musk has also now entered the fray, not only when it comes to the leadership of the free world, but also when it comes to the Allison Pearson episode 2. Co-pilot, you've become the story. L'histoire, c'est toi. It all started on Remembrance Sunday. Tell us what happened.
You're loving this, aren't you?
Did you like my intro?
Yeah, was it something about me? Have I made the news?
Your fizzog is staring at me out my screen because I'm on the Telegraph website. It's you giving someone the eye across the, not that kind of eye, across the street. God, I'm glad you're on my side.
I'm sufficiently old-fashioned to think the journalist should never become the story, but, needs must. Yes, so it was quite the episode. But at the rate things are going, Liam, I'll be on the prevent terror watch list by the end of the week. I mean, I really like Remembrance Sunday. I always find it a rather moving day of the year, a moment to think about our history and about the amazing men and women who made sacrifices so we could be here.
And have our debates.
Just before 9:40, himself came upstairs and looked a bit pale and said there's some police at the door. So I wasn't unduly bothered. I thought that's a bit strange. I went down, there were 2 Essex constables, and the one on the left said something about a non-crime hate incident. I thought I heard that correctly. And he said it was relating to a social media post a year ago. So I said, what was it? What was the offence? And he said it was stirring up racial hatred. So I just asked him to tell me what it was.
What particular tweet? What particular words?
What particular tweet and what words, and I couldn't think of anything that would have stirred up racial hatred. I'm not in the habit of doing that. And then he said, we're not allowed to tell you.
Wow.
And then I said, can you tell me the name of the accuser? Because that might then give me a bit more information. And he said, no, we're not allowed to tell you that either, but they're not the accuser, they're called the victim. So that was interesting.
Even while the so-called incident is being investigated, they're already the victim.
Yeah, they're not the complainant.
Which infers guilt
Yes.
rather than inquiry.
Yeah, the victim of my stirring up racial hatred. And then I said, how am I supposed to defend myself if I don't know any of the details of what I'm being accused of. So it was deeply odd. I was dumbfounded, upset. It's not very nice. I was in my dressing gown on the step of the house. These two coppers were there just outside the door.
You live in the middle of a market town. You got neighbours.
Yeah, and there were people gathering, for the Remembrance Day parade.
Yeah.
So there were people watching from the other side of the road. And I don't know at which point I said to these coppers that this is a special day in the calendar because we commemorate the sacrifice of tens of thousands of mainly young men your age who gave their lives so we could live in a free country, not under the jackboot of tyranny. And I said, I don't know what they would think of you being here today to basically interview me about a thought crime. You know what I'm like when I go off on one. So I had a little Pearson peroration in the road.
Which you've written up, of course, in your Telegraph column in Wednesday's paper, linked to the show notes in this episode. And it was an incredibly moving piece of writing. And you were clearly really, really upset by this.
You kept thinking that's not nice. This is our country, Liam, And I would say, obviously I've had a little bit of time to reflect. Whatever I posted, and I have no recollection. Clearly, if it was a year ago, it was just around the time after the 7th of October massacres in Israel. So it could have been linked to that, or it possibly could have been linked to the pro-Palestine marches, which I've been very concerned about. And I would say, co-pilot, that if anything's been stirring up racial hatred in our country, it's been the failure of the police to act quickly and definitively against some of the pro-Hamas elements on those marches. But yes, just to say that whatever I did or didn't tweet, and if somebody found it offensive, that to me is still not a reason for two policemen to come to my house on a Sunday morning. They don't do that for burglars, do they? We know that policing is under-resourced and that they are unable to attend often quite serious crimes that people are really upset about. So this made me very suspicious. I thought it was quite chilling that this case from a year ago, how much hatred had I managed to stir up in 12 months? Clearly not so much that anyone would be rushing to confront me about it. So there's a lot about the case that doesn't add up. But I think that something that's clear, these non-hate crime incidents, which is what I thought it was, they're now saying it's a more general criminal inquiry, but these NCHIs, when Suella Braverman was Home Secretary, she wanted to get rid of them, Liam, and she wanted to get rid of them because she saw that they were a threat to freedom of speech, which she believed was a cornerstone of our democracy, as I do. So whatever I said, I certainly wouldn't have written anything deliberately horrible or inflammatory. But whatever I did or didn't say, this was the most extraordinary overreach and state intrusion into my private life. And I don't think I did anything wrong. And I think their response was outrageous.
And now, following your column and the Telegraph's coverage of your column, you've been doing interviews with other broadcasters and talking about the story. And Elon Musk has been retweeting, if we can still call it retweeting these days, because the platform is now called X, your story. And he's clearly taking an interest, the guy who runs Twitter.
He responded, someone had said a journalist had a visit from the police, and Elon Musk tweeted, "This must stop." And I know we've got a leader column going in the Telegraph, I believe, tomorrow, written by one of our very, very good writers, who also ends his leader column with "This must stop." But I don't know, what do you make of it, Liam? Obviously, you know me. Does it seem shocking? Does it just seem ridiculous? How does it seem to you?
It does seem shocking and ridiculous and a complete waste of police time, a massively insensitive arrangement to go to your house unannounced, unbeknownst to you, on a Sunday morning, and Remembrance Sunday of all mornings. The market town where you live and I live, it does have a proud military history. There's long been a services base nearby. Remembrance Sunday in our town is a huge thing. And it's incredible to me that the police think this is worth doing. Why are we doing this? I don't get it. And now Elon Musk is getting interested, just as he's been appointed to the Trump administration, incredibly.
I think in answer to your question, why are they interested? I've got before me the statistics for Essex Police solving crimes stats. So the figures for burglary solving are 6.3%.
This is during the 12 months to August 2024.
Yes. So generally very unimpressive.
Violence against the person, 12% solving record. Sexual offences, 9.6%. Robbery, 13%.
And then we go down the list, Liam, and then we come into what you might call the thought crime area.
Hate crime detection rate is 16%.
Yes. And then they've also got religiously aggravated offences.
And that's almost 19%.
That's almost 19%.
So they're higher than all the others by quite a long way.
Now, I would suggest that the vast majority of people would want the areas in which they're not doing very well to be better and not really be particularly bothered about these things, the thought crimes. But they seem to be really getting a lot of resources, or if we were being cynical, Liam, we'd say they don't really take a lot of their effort, do they? Because you don't actually have to go out and catch burglars. You can just turn up at the house of pleasant, respectable, middle-aged people and make them feel upset and frightened. And I was told by a senior Home Office source that some of the chief constables who are quite woke, and they actually rather like the non-crime hate incidents and these things which we just mentioned Essex Police are doing a bit better in. And that's because the pressure groups, the sort of more progressive pressure groups, really like to see action on Islamophobia, racism, disability, whatever. So they get a lot of brownie points for doing well with those, and it doesn't take a lot of crime solving. So I think it's win-win as far as the police are concerned. And I'm sure you will know, Liam, I certainly know in our area of quite serious and upsetting crimes where they have put in very little effort. It's been a real struggle to get the police to engage. So it seems to me that I was the living proof of two-tier justice. People not bothering. I mean, to be honest, with my most sort of cynical hat on, I thought, if I punched a policeman, I'd probably get less attention than from posting a tweet, because we know that the alleged attackers at the Manchester airport, fracas, which some listeners, Planet Normal listeners will remember, I'm not sure that any of those people who appeared to assault police officers, I'm not sure that they've been charged yet. And that may be due to community sensitivities. I'm an easy target, aren't I? And I just think it's chilling. I think it's Keir Starmer's Soviet Britain. And I think what I've had today is hundreds and hundreds of, obviously messages of support from readers and listeners, particularly lots of Planet Normal listeners saying, can we help? And you know what, Liam, I wasn't really upset. I hadn't processed it in a kind of emotional way, but reading some of listeners' emails earlier today, I did get very tearful because people were so lovely. Is there anything we can do? We're trying to form a group of support for you in Somerset. Literally, thank you, Sally Ann, for saying that. I just got quite moved because I thought it was horrible, and it's so nice that most people who've got in touch, find it profoundly shocking that this is going on in our country.
Well, you've got a cracking Planet Normal interview this week, which also deals with these themes. But before we come on to that, let's talk about Trump, but also let's talk about farming, because while you were away last week, of course, the excellent Tim Stanley filled in for you, and we heard from farmer Richard Payne, who farms around 700 acres in the West Country, 550 odd of which he actually owns. And he gave a very reasoned, rational, but also very moving interview, Allison, as you'll have heard.
It was excellent.
Saying that he's been through the figures with his accountant, and this new inheritance tax regime, announced, of course, in Rachel Reeves' budget on the 30th of October, it would generally mean his son had to break up the farm in order to pay the inheritance tax, which would make the farm cease to be commercially viable after generations of farming on the land. And Richard was very, very agitated by it. And at the end of the interview, I said to him, don't you think British farmers need to become a bit more French-styly, tractors going down Whitehall and all the rest of it? And he did actually, in his very measured way, he did actually issue a bit of a warning at the end of that interview, a warning which seems to have come true.
I really love it when we have people like Richard, as you say, just telling his life as it is. And those of us, my mother's uncle and aunt had a small farm in Wales, and, it was a wonderful place, a place of great welcome, but immense hard work, Liam. I mean, all the hours God sends, no holidays. These are labours of love, these places, aren't they? They're not big money spinners. And as Richard said to you,
it's a way of life.
Some of the equipment may be worth £1 million or something, but he's not going to cash it in, is he? It's his tools.
He needs it.
Yeah. And I think that, obviously we've seen the government has alienated the pensioners with cuts to the winter fuel allowance. That's one group that's really, really angry and upset. And now they've picked on the farmers. And I think this is a huge miscalculation, because there is great sentimental attachment, I think, to the idea of farmers and livestock and growing our own food. And we're seeing, I think we actually saw, didn't we, this week? I mean, we both commented on it, the Labour commentator, John McTernan, who gave an extraordinary interview, didn't he, Liam, in which he seemed to say that we don't need any small farms.
We both know John McTernan. John McTernan really quite recently was a guest on Planet Normal. He's Tony Blair's former chief of staff. He also worked very closely with Gordon Brown and Harriet Harman throughout the whole of the New Labour years from 1997 onwards. And you're right, he gave an interview to GB News in which he said the country doesn't need small farms, and saying that we should do to farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to the miners. Pretty strong words, to say the least, incendiary, some would say.
Yes, and I think as well, I mean, I know he was very interesting when you interviewed him for Planet Normal, but I know a lot of the listeners, there were real sharp intakes of breath, because I think you get from him, I'm not sure if Marxist is the right word, but he is unsparing, Liam, in his leftist agenda. And he certainly, when he spoke to you, seemed to give me the impression that he thought everyone's houses and property were fair game.
And he was being more moderate because it was before the election, of course. And
yes,
political journalists in particular know how influential he is, how plugged in he is. He's a very senior Labour strategist with serious inside knowledge.
But what he said on GB News was absolutely chilling. And to me, it chimes in with their increasingly alarming and preposterous net zero agenda, because what we're seeing this week also is COP29, the jamboree, the bun fight of the great and the good from across the globe coming together to talk about how they're going to give all our money away to the poorer countries for apparently to arrest climate change. It's in Azerbaijan this time, and full of unintentional comedy, because the country's leader, Ilham Aliyev, said that oil and gas are the gift of God, and that countries rich in those resources should not be blamed for bringing them to market. So old Ilham was a bit off message, wasn't he?
He literally pointed the finger at, quotes, Western fake news about Azerbaijan's emissions, and said nations should not be blamed for having fossil fuels. It reminded me of Ricky Gervais introducing the Golden Globes.
Yes, exactly.
just hosing everyone down, the great and the good in front of him. I don't care. It's the last time. I don't care. So when you come up here and give your little speech about climate change, thank you, God. Thank your parents. Tom Hanks taking a sharp intake of breath.
Absolutely.
In the crowd.
And then the COP Summit's chief executive, one Elna Sultanov, was actually caught on film promoting fossil fuels. So it really is as if these countries, the petrochemical countries, are laughing at our naivety. But of course, it's no laughing matter back here in Britain, where Keir Starmer has been claiming that no, our new climate targets, they won't involve telling us how to live our lives. And then literally within 24 hours, Britain must eat less meat to hit Starmer climate targets, says Starmer. So we're not going to tell you how to live your lives, but burgers are off. And actually, I think that what we've got at the moment, Liam, is I think we're going to talk about Trump, but it's very interesting because some of the major players are missing from COP29, aren't they? I don't think Macron has gone. The Trump administration is certainly not going because Donald doesn't agree with it. And I think one of the big first acts of the Trump administration could be to pull out of the Paris Accord. I think that's the 2016 international agreement on climate change targets. And drill, baby, drill, Don is not. Meanwhile, we've got Ed Miliband saying nobody's drilling ever again, and we're not going to let any more exploration in the North Sea. But coming back quickly to the farmers, Liam, I'm afraid, I suspect there is a horrible plan that all these small farms will go to the wall in order that Mad Ed can carpet them with solar panels. And I should just say quickly that listeners will have noticed the last 2 weeks have been extremely overcast with what's called Dunkelflaut, which I think we've mentioned before on the podcast. And Dunkelflaut is a period with barely any wind and hardly any sun. And we have been almost entirely dependent on gas during this period to keep our lights on and our phones charged.
And interconnectors from the continent.
Interconnectors from the continent.
Importing electricity.
If you looked at it, Liam, harshly, energy security, buggered, right? Our energy security by this madman, while everyone else is, laughing at us. We are a climate leader. You can only be a leader if anybody wants to follow you, Ed. And food security. So energy security gone because we're going to be so dependent on other countries. Food security, all the small farms will be gone because John McTernan thinks they can just be shut down.
Trump, meanwhile, is re-emerging. He's been in Mar-a-Lago for the last week. He's meeting Joe Biden on Wednesday, going to Capitol Hill. And I think it's fair to say he's really laying the groundwork quickly for his second presidency, which, of course, begins in January. Elon Musk, he's running a new Department of Government Efficiency alongside Vivek Ramaswamy, of course, who contested for the Republican nomination. He's got Pete Hegseth in as the Defense Secretary. He's a former Army officer and Fox News host. And as you say, I do think he is going to really light a touch paper, if you like, on the whole net zero debate. And along with net zero, of course, there's also the prospect he could bring in tariffs on trade. I was in the States, though, since we last recorded, since he was elected. I spent a few days in New York and New York State with my son. We were there celebrating my lovely cousin's 40th birthday. I've got a lot of Irish American cousins and so on. And I talked to lots of people there. And this was sort of Democrat territory. This is prosperous New York, Connecticut border where people have their country piles and they go into Wall Street and Midtown and make their money in Manhattan. And these are typically very well-educated, prosperous Democrats. And yet I had a lot of conversations with Catherine's cousin, journalists from England, talking to me about what was really going on. And there were a lot of silent Trump supporters there who'd gone to Trump for the first time. And they were saying it doesn't feel like a gimmick like it did in 2020. It's a clear victory. People knew what they were going to get and they went for it. And it's incredible, Allison, if you look at the numbers, Trump's biggest gains from 2020 to 2024 were actually in the most Democrat states. So Trump gained 13 points, 13% of the vote in California. He still lost California because it's probably the most Democrat of all the states, certainly the big states. And yet he gained 13%. He gained 12% in New York State, which of course is very Democrat.
Astonishing.
Really amazing.
Yeah.
He gained like 9% in Massachusetts. All these really liberal blue states, as we call them in America, Democrat states, and yet big gains for Trump. That California increase, that reflects the big surge in the Latino vote for Trump. There was a big surge in the vote of African Americans and also young men voted for Trump in big numbers. He won the popular vote and he won the White House. And very, very few Republican presidents have done that in recent history.
We saw, of course, the British media sort of Trump haters practically to a mate list, weren't they? Absolutely self-combusting with horror that this bombastic Adolf Hitler was taking over. But I thought it was really interesting. I think I said a while ago, Liam, on Planet Normal, that I absolutely didn't believe the American people would vote Kamala Harris to be their first woman president. I didn't think she was up to the job. I thought it was insulting that it was just assumed that women would vote for her in huge numbers and would not vote for Trump because of a rather unsavory personal and legal history. But it seemed to me very clear that what's happened with the Democrats, who used to be broadly sensible left, is that they've gone over to the wilder shores of progressive leftism, including free transgender transition operations for prisoners. And Trump did very well in the last 48 hours. They just ran relentlessly adverts in the swing states talking to parents about, do you want your children being told that they're in the wrong body? And Trump has already made a statement saying he's going to make the teaching of that kind of thing illegal. But I've got a quick Velma stat. You interested?
Go on then.
Okay.
Yes, you do.
Right. So white women make up an astounding 38% of all people who vote in the states. And in the swing states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, they make up an even higher proportion, 42, 43, and 44% respectively. Now, women do overall favour the Democrats, but white women do not. 2016, more white women voted for Trump than for Hillary Clinton. In 2020, an even higher 53% of white women went for Trump over Biden. Now, this is fascinating, Liam. Only twice since 1952 have this amazing voting group of white women chosen the Democratic candidate over the Republican. And I asked you to guess which Democrat men they liked, and you guessed, didn't you?
LBJ
Yeah.
and Clinton.
Yeah, and what do we know about those? They were both notably masculine men. Johnson was a bit of a redneck bastard, but who pushed through some of the most astonishing civil rights legislation. And I guess if the Pearson theory is borne out, is that Bill Clinton and Donald Trump are not that dissimilar, really. Both of them have got animal high spirits. Remember, Hillary Clinton described Bill as a hard dog to keep on the porch. Well, that is certainly Trump as well.
They do like a bit of a rogue, the Americans, don't they? They like a bit of a rogue.
Yeah.
As long as he's our rogue.
So what the Kamala Harris class would purse their lips and say toxic masculinity, guess what? Millions of white women in America like the bad boys. And not just the bad boys, but perhaps a bit of swagger, a sense of strength, a sense that, this person might be able to punch the correct weight on the international stage. And I also think, just to conclude, Liam, that I think that they've always said, oh, Trump, he's a hugely divisive figure. Well, he's not. You can't call him a divisive figure anymore, can you? Because he's enormously attractive to Hispanic men and women, black men, younger men. He did better among first-time voters than Harris. So I think that what happened really was that American people were really sick of being told by a Puritan, ideologically pious elite that they belong in a basket of deplorables. And Tina Brown, a great writer, great journalist, she's got a new Substack, Fresh Hell, lovely, lovely title. And Tina wrote, Trump's victory is a big fat raspberry to democratic orthodoxies, woke dogma and identity politics. And it sure is, because, Musk has just been put in charge of the DOGE, Department of
Government Efficiency.
All bets are off, Liam. It's going to be amazing, don't you think, to see what they do?
I do think it's going to be incredibly interesting. A lot of people are going to be alarmed. I think we're going to have history on speed under Trump for the next few years. So I wanted to finish by saying one thing. I don't think this was misogyny. A lot of people that wanted Harris to win have said, oh, it's because she's a woman. I absolutely didn't get that impression from my many, many discussions while I was in the States over the last week. I actually think, Allison, that Michelle Obama, had she ran with a long lead up with a primary and all the rest of it, I think she could have beaten Trump. I do think America would elect a woman president if it was the right woman. But Harris just wasn't the right woman. Some people would say it was Biden's fault. He hung around for too long. She didn't have a chance. She was only there for 100 days. It was going to be impossible. But I think it was more than that. I think there was a lot of disappointment, particularly among many of the Democrats I spoke to in the States, at her performance and the fact that she had so little time. And even, just to go back to those numbers, the state where Trump gained the most, the biggest swing to Trump was California, that 13% swing. California, that's the home state of Kamala Harris. She was both the Attorney General of California and she was the Senator for California. And that was where Trump had the biggest gains.
Now on to our Planet Normal interview. Our guest this week is a woman of great courage and principle. Bernadette Spofforth is a business leader, social commentator, and an advocate for free speech and democracy. With a background that spans a NASDAQ business flotation, acquisitions, and startups, this Cheshire-based entrepreneur first came to prominence on social media during COVID, when she was a leading lockdown skeptic. Bernie temporarily lost her Twitter account and tens of thousands of followers after she queried some of the claims being made for the COVID vaccine, which indeed did prove to be inaccurate. Recently, after the killings in Southport of 3 little girls, Bernie retweeted a post about the identity of the alleged attacker. She quickly realised the information was wrong and deleted her tweet, but it was too late. The media and the authorities landed on this respectable middle-class mum of 3 as the perfect scapegoat for the subsequent Southport riots. Bernie was subjected to a harrowing arrest, spent 36 hours in a cell before police made an NFA, no further action ruling, and released her without charge. That incident has had a devastating impact on Bernie's personal and professional life. But picking herself back up, Bernadette Spofforth is this week launching a new platform, If This Is True, which aims to explore critical issues in modern society, such as overregulation, freedom of speech, the ruinous rush to net zero, she's particularly good on that, and the influence of global organisations on national policy. I started by asking Bernie exactly what happened. Now, Bernie, you retweeted a post on X, formerly Twitter, about the alleged identity of the killer, and to which you added the caveat, if this is true, basically all hell will break loose. Can you tell Planet Normal listeners what that tweet was and the order of events that happened next?
You know that it was an extremely busy day. On the news, it was all over the place. I'd seen it, but I was outside. I wasn't at work that day. I was outside. And as I've said before on many occasions, and as the police know, I clipped an image. I copied and pasted a name and a sentence from a different post, but it was only a couple of posts after I clipped that image. And I just put it on my phone and I went back outside again. In hindsight, lots of things happen in hindsight, right? I probably would have deleted it within 5 or 6 minutes. I didn't. It took me a couple of hours to get back to the phone. I know people have said, oh, it was hours and hours before I deleted it. That isn't the case. You can see deleted tweets. You see deleted posts all the time, right? I deleted it before I fed the dog. And then the snowball started happening. And I think that, very unfortunately for me, most of my posts, I don't attack people. I don't insult people. I tend to do quite a lot of research. And that's probably why it was retweeted so often, which is very unfortunate because it was not a correct post. Now, I did put the caveat, if this is true, because I knew I hadn't done the work. But of course, you have all of those people who just want to jump on anything, and they did. And a very large group of people who particularly don't like the things I say banded together. And I guess you used to have a situation where mass reporting at Twitter would get your account suspended. Now what you have is a mass reporting to the Met Police, and they take notice, right? Like they did at your house. And it didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter what I proved. I had all of the evidence available that I hadn't made it up. 4 days later, 5 days later, actually, the police turned up. And it was utterly horrifying because by then, of course, I'd already been all over the press. The Channel 4 had decided to run a big piece on me, giving my photographs where I lived, saying that I'd made this up. I'd started these riots. It's absolutely outrageous. And the two charges that they tried to charge me with, of course, I had come nowhere near the threshold. There was no reason to charge me. And subsequently, we hear all sorts of things about the alleged perpetrator of these crimes and that the government and the police knew and hid that from us.
It seemed to me that the police said almost immediately that the Southport massacre was not terrorist related. And that caused many of us to be cynical or suspicious. Is that fair?
I don't know, because I wasn't involved in it at all. Don't forget, for the next 3 days, all I did was fight for my reputation. And the day after that, I was in a police cell. And by the time I got out, I was so desperately traumatized. I can't even put into words how traumatized I was. I didn't move off the couch for maybe 48 hours. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't do anything because my entire career and reputation had been destroyed for absolutely no reason.
So the media and online commentators seemed to seize upon you as a scapegoat, basically, for the rioting that followed the Southport disaster. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they don't like the types of hypocrisy I point out. They don't like the questioning. They don't like the fact that I stand up for people or I stand up for free speech, and that I don't do it in a pithy way. I do it in a considered way. And of course, they don't like that. So if they can say she lied about this, then they can say everything else she ever says is in question. And that, of course, is reputationally devastating.
I just had a couple of slightly clueless coppers turning up at my doorstep on Remembrance Sunday, and it wasn't nice, but I was able to stand my ground. What happened to you, Bernie, was just a lot of vehicles and police, which is something that we might associate with people coming to arrest a terrorist.
Yeah, they turned up with a van as well. 5 of them came into the house. I didn't really get much of a chance to speak. And I knew, basically, if you read a lot of books and you used to watch a lot of crappy detective programs on the television like you do, I kind of understood what was happening. My family didn't understand what was happening. So I started to take off my jewelry. And they were like, why are you taking off your jewelry? And I said, because they'll put me in a cell and they'll take it off at the police station. And my daughter was, no, they won't. Yes, they will. And then they said, we need to search you. And the most surreal part of this was that, and I don't know if I can perhaps describe this well enough, but half of my brain had completely shut down. But the other part turned into Jack Reacher. I must remember every single detail of this because one day I will want to write this down. But I remember being taken up the stairs by a female police officer who was commenting on my wallpaper. And I remember thinking, this is not normal for me. Please don't comment on my wallpaper. And then they searched me and I said, can I take a jumper? And she said, you can't take anything with you and it's hot outside. And I said, I know I'm going to need a jumper. And so I got one. And then I said, can I take a book? And she said, no. And I said, I want to take a book with me to read in the car. And so they let me take a book. And to my shame, Allison, The biggest book on my bookshelf is a family Bible. And I didn't take it because I thought that they might think I was a far-right lunatic if I took the Bible. I honestly believe that they would think that.
So so there's all this stuff, part of your brain is shut down in shock, part of you is trying to remember every detail. Are you thinking, look, I've done nothing wrong, I'm living in a free country, what the hell is happening here?
Yes. And so the part of my brain that had shut down was doing that. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't done anything wrong. Nothing I've done wrong is illegal. I've got all of the evidence. I can prove I didn't do this. But the other half of my brain wants to be really brave. Of course, I regret not being braver. But I guess you never know how you're going to feel in that situation until it happens to you. I guess you don't know how you'll react. I wish I'd been brave. I wish that I'd videoed the whole thing while I could at home. And the argument about me refusing to go into a van, I was just like a zombie. And they opened this prison cage thing. And my husband said, not a chance. And they said, she needs to go in this. And he was like, you'll have to go through me. So he was brave. But I was just a complete puddle of mess. It was pathetic, actually. I'm embarrassed looking back.
Husband and kids were witnessing this. How old are the children?
Oh, they're much older now. My son was just arriving home. He's 22. My husband was there. My daughter, she's 25. So they're much older. But it's horrifying to sit when nobody thought I had done anything at all illegal. And of course, they take your phone off you. Now, I know from watching the telly, you're supposed to call your lawyer, right? I don't have a criminal lawyer. Do you have a criminal lawyer? I don't have one. So the only thing I could think of to do then was literally give my husband my phone on WhatsApp. And I was just onto a friend and I said, take a photograph. And he just took a photograph and then they took my phone. So he had one person's number who he knew, I knew, could help. And they did. Just people run around after you, don't they? And they were fantastic. But of course, I didn't know.
All of your followers and supporters, people who've been with you through the COVID years, which we'll come to, but we were absolutely distraught on your behalf and everyone was trying to put together any help we could give you, but obviously feeling very helpless. So you were taken to the police station and put in a cell where I believe you were kept for 36 hours. At what point did they charge you and what was happening to you in the cell?
So again, it was so surreal, Allison, honestly. So first of all, I'm fascinated. Half of my brain, right, is fascinated that I'm in a police station, right, at the other side of the counter. This was amazing. And the other half of my brain is slush. So I got taken to this big front desk and I got asked to, is this me? And they read out the two charges they were going to charge me with. And then he said, it's very noisy in here today and we've tried to find you somewhere quiet because we believe you might be vulnerable. I was like, right. And then my brain woke up. It was so noisy. There was screaming, banging, swearing. And I realized this is a very loud place. And I followed this policeman down a corridor and they literally put me in the cell. Again, totally fascinating. It was a off-white concrete and the window was full of those glass squares that were frosted. So I could see if it was daylight or nighttime, but I couldn't see anything outside. There was a metal toilet, but there was no water in it. And the button was high up on the wall. And that was when I figured out, right, this is so you can't drown yourself. Right, this is literally so you can't drown yourself. And then
Bernie, what did they say the charges were?
I haven't got them in front of me, Allison, but one was trying to incite violence by being racist, and the other was making something up in order to cause harm. But both of those charges, very specifically, have very high legal thresholds because, number one, who was I intending to harm? No one has been harmed. Yes, no, you have to have a victim. There is no victim apart from the 3 little girls and the 10 people that were stabbed. They're not going to be harmed by my post. And the other was inciting racial hatred. Well, of course, I didn't put a race on there. Why would I have done that? I was talking about, is this going to be another mental health excuse that keeps being rolled out? So there really was no intent to do anything. And they left me in this room, and then they took me out of the cell, and they did DNA, and they checked my shoes in case I'd robbed a bank. Like they do one of those light things on you to see if you glow in the dark in case I'd robbed a bank. And then they did all my fingerprints, and all of these things I want removed. I want everything removed. I was not charged with anything. They couldn't charge me with anything. So I want all of those things removed. Why should the police have my details?
Do you think that at the heart of this was the stabbing to death of Elsie, Bibi and Alice? And that crime, it seems to me, Bernie, was pushed aside very quickly, and the focus moved to clamping down on the wicked rioters and people like you allegedly spreading so-called misinformation on social media. What do you think that the British state via the police is trying to do when events like that occur?
Look, I'm quite a balanced person, so I can see a very speedy response to trying to keep things under control because the entire country was a tinderbox. I completely understand that. But I think it fell very neatly into, oh, look, and we can make an example of people. And I think that's what they tried to do. And of course, I don't have the protection of being a journalist because I'm not one. I don't have the protection of being an MP because I'm not one. And so here was this person that had perhaps been a thorn in their side for some years. And oh, look, she doesn't speak like Tommy Robinson. She's more kind of on a business level. We haven't had one of those before. Let's get her. That's what I honestly believe happened. And don't forget, the misinformation came from the police because they arrested me under the name Bonnie Spofforth. And they also arrested me for the Stockport riots. So mistakes can happen. And that's all it was. And it was deleted.
So, but also we had Keir Starmer quickly out of the blocks, threatening swift action against far-right thugs. Now, you were released mercifully, Bernie. The police issued an NFA, no further action. You were released without charge, but we know that there were other people like grandfather Peter Lynch, who recently tragically took his own life in jail. Lucy Connelly, the wife of a Tory councillor, mother of one, no previous record, who was jailed for more than 2.5 years for posting a racist tweet. Do you think the punishments for people like Peter and Lucy were disproportionate?
Yes. Utterly disproportionate in every regard. In every regard. No, look, I don't agree with people writing appalling posts. I would never. You would never. But you can't. I don't believe you can stop people being who they are, because here's for why. We're all incredibly different, and it's incredibly different ideas and concepts and views that help us develop as a society and a civilization. It also allows you to mix with the people you like and not the people you don't like, right? So if you don't like what someone's saying to you, you can challenge them or perhaps decide you don't really want to mix with them. That's your choice. If at the end of the day, the state controls everything that is said, 2 things will happen. 3 things will happen, actually. Number 1, you will stop progress because no one will be able to have a different idea than anyone else. 2, you will push it underground where it's always far more dangerous. There's a reason why CB radio sales are on the increase, because people want to be able to talk. And number 3, you're going to hide people's true personalities. So you're not going to know who the bad people are if they're never allowed to say what they think. It's wrong. And on top of this crushing of freedom of speech, you've got the crushing of freedom of information. So people say to me, are you a free speech absolutist? And I would say, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because I'm a free information absolutist. Give people all of the information and allow them to decide, which they don't do. They didn't do in COVID. They didn't do over these riots. They're not doing over things like illegal migration. They're not doing over net zero. What they're doing is telling us information piecemeal, which was easy, of course, before the internet. We just had the newspapers and that was the news. But in order to crush free speech, they must censor information. And those two, I think, it will absolutely be the end of freedom, full stop.
You told me a story about you being involved in a sort of debate with a left-wing comedian, which was very revealing about the attitude of a certain kind of educational elite to so-called ordinary, uneducated people. Do you want to share that with Planet Normal listeners?
So I really do consider myself ordinary, and I really do have this powerful belief that democracy is the greatest thing. And it's the only thing really that the ordinary person has, that their vote will count for something. And I believe everybody should have the right to vote and they should exercise that. After the Brexit referendum, I would always be able to argue both sides. In fact, I didn't tell anyone whether I'd voted yes or no until afterwards. It was very much the same case with the COVID vaccination. I never told anyone if I had or I hadn't. It's no one else's business, right? But after the Brexit, I was contacted by this very well-known left-wing comedian, and he asked me why I'd voted to leave, and I told him. And then he said that he believed that no one should be allowed to vote in a general election or actually in a referendum unless they had a degree. So I was a bit stumped by this, and I said to him, well, what happens if you've worked on a port all your life and everything about running a port, about emissions, weights, tides, costs, managing people, health and safety? Does that person not have, in your opinion, the right to vote because they don't have a degree, even though they've got fantastic experience over 40 years? And he said no. And I said, well, what degree did you get? And he said, English literature. And I said, well, what makes you more qualified to vote in a general election than the bloke that's worked on the docks for 40 years? And he genuinely believed that his English degree gave him more right to vote than the bloke on the docks, or the bloke without a job, or the woman who stays at home, hasn't got a degree, but is parenting 3 kids. No right to vote at all because they don't have a degree. Just so arrogant and so blind and so narrow-minded.
On Planet Normal, Bernie, we like to find out a bit about what made people into who they are. I'm interested in your family background, how you got into business. You yourself haven't got a degree, but you've had a NASDAQ business flotation, acquisitions, several startups. What made Bernie the person she is today?
I grew up in South Africa, so my stepfather was made redundant as a machine tool fitter from a local firm called Foden's, and off we all went to emigrate to South Africa, where I spent all of my formative years in an incredibly political and politicized country, always getting into trouble there too, actually. And I wanted to be a lawyer, but it was a really stupid idea to become a lawyer in South Africa, and so was coming back to the UK and had terrible trouble getting into a university because, of course, I didn't have English A-levels. I couldn't pay for it anyway. I was a foreign student, even though I had a British passport, hadn't lived. Anyway, it was a mess. And so I got a job, and I got a job that I was just very good at. And it was currency trading across all the globe, but in computer parts rather than currencies. So it was buying and selling across borders in multiple currencies. I was just good at it, and so successful at it, in fact, that myself and a partner started our own company doing a very similar thing, which I did very well, and we floated that on NASDAQ just before the law changed and the EU decided to have this trademark exhaustion law, which meant you couldn't do what we were doing. And so then I had to think of a new business, and I did DAB radio, which was in tempo, and I worked with Apple to use the female connector. And we had a massively successful DAB radio, and then just worked for various companies. And for 11 years, I've looked after a company. I left earlier this year in February. And then this year collapsed on my head. That's it, really. Married, 3 children, live on a farm.
We've got the COP29 meeting this week in Azerbaijan. Now, you have been yet again outspoken, saying never in human history has an industrial revolution been forced from the top down that will make humans worse off. The delusions of government is unimaginable and terrifying. Bernie, how would you describe what Ed Milliband is doing to the UK?
I think he's an utter lunatic. And actually, it's quite good timing, this call, because today, or maybe tomorrow, depends if we can figure out YouTube, but I'm launching If This Is True. And the first videos in this are going to cover the utter unimaginable con that net zero is. I would just want to sit him in a room. We have to increase mining by 2,000% in 7 years. Now, we call it rare earth today. In 10 years, this will be scarce earth. We have a tiny country. There will be wars over scarce earth. It is the most ludicrous, ridiculous, unworkable, economy-destroying position that he has taken. No civilized country in the world is successful without cheap energy. And currently we have the most expensive energy in the world. And I'm almost numb with fury about the propaganda that's being pushed out on these things. Yeah, it's ludicrous.
Bernie, do you welcome then the victory of Donald Trump in the United States? And what might be the beneficial impact on British politics?
I think it's hilarious, first of all, that the left meltdown is so complete. And I've heard people say things like, I can't believe people voted just for their own incomes. Yes, that's what we do. If he turns on his own energy supply again for the good of his country, he will boost the economy. It will increase his GDP. It will give people more money in their pockets. It will bring down inflation, and they will be happier, right? Because they will be. And I think we've got 4 years of complete and utter madness. And in that time, I will do everything I can to expose the costs and the implications on the British public, everything I can. And we must, in 4 years' time, do what the Americans have done and wipe this out of our politics. And it's only the majority that can do that. And I'm sick of them being silent. Don't be a silent majority. Be the majority. And I think Donald Trump will actually be very good nationally. How he'll be internationally, I don't know. He's threatening to pull out of NATO, so he should. He's paying for it. The Germans don't pay for it. He's threatening to pull out of the World Health Organization, so he should. It is a privately funded operation that is not working in a national way. It's working in a global governance way. Nobody voted for that. So all of these things, I think, will create some difficulties for the globalists. But let's see, because in a globalist plan, 4 years is a very short amount of time. The Republican Party would need to be in for at least 12 years, I would have thought. Donald Trump and then whoever else, maybe J.D. Vance gets in, and then again it's going to take that amount of time to turn around what's currently happening.
Finally, Bernie, I just want to end on a congratulatory note for you. I admire you so hugely. I know that Planet Normal listeners like me will be looking forward to this new platform if this is true, because goodness knows you're an amazing researcher, a truffler up of critical detail, and people deserve to know about these truths about freedom of speech, the influence of global organizations on national policy. I just wanted to finally say you've been through this almost unimaginable, harrowing ordeal in what we both hoped and believed was a free country. Has that experience made you more timid, or are you, Bernie Spofforth, more determined than ever to try and stick up for the normal person?
It's actually quite a sad story, this, Allison. I won't cry, but it is quite a sad story because it broke me completely. And the thing that broke me was, as I said earlier, everything I have ever achieved, everything, every detail, every job, every success was wiped out by the media in this country and by those activists and by the government who decided to make an example of me for nothing. And yes, it destroyed me and made me very timid. But my husband said to me, if you don't do anything now, if you do what they want you to do and you're quiet and you do your potting and your dog and your farm, then when you die and someone Googles you, that's the last thing they'll see. And he said, do you want to be remembered like that? And I said, no. And so you have to dig really deep and you need very good friends. And I've been very lucky that some friends abandoned me, colleagues abandoned me. I've had the worst possible emails you can imagine, particularly from my industry. But then a few people, unexpected people, pop up and they will not let you go. And I really needed that. And I'll be forever grateful for those people that just would not let me go. And so as I come out of this period, I'm beginning to look forward and hope that, one day when I die, in 200 years, when they turn the computer off, because that'll be where I've downloaded myself, at that point, other things will have replaced the bad that's only there now. Because I was asked to Google myself for this podcast, for some articles, and it made me cry. I couldn't do it. And I have to replace that with something worthwhile.
Well, Bernie, we think you're remarkable on Planet Normal, and thank you so much for telling your story.
Incredible interview, Allison. There are lots of parallel. It's timely, isn't it, that you were interviewing Bernie Spofforth anyway, and then this thing happened to you on Remembrance Sunday. It's almost as if what happened to her is a more serious version of what happened to you.
Absolutely. It was really uncanny. I mean, in a way, it couldn't have been better timed, although obviously I had felt huge empathy for her before, but even more so after that. It is awful, Liam, what happened to her. And she's a very clever woman. You can tell from her business history. She's launched companies and so on. She's amazingly eloquent. And the tragedy is that I would say Bernie is one of the best researchers on social media. She comes up with really, really compelling packages of information and argues her case very, very well. But on that one instance, guess what? She's human. She retweeted something which she took down very, very quickly. But that was enough to invite this astonishing arrival of the full force of the police. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, how is this proportionate? So I look at the sort of hate marches we've been seeing for a year, where police will argue, when we hear terrible slogans which seem anti-Semitic or anti the right of Israel to exist, the Metropolitan Police will argue, you've got to think of the context. That's not what it means in Arabic or whatever. But there's no context, no leeway given to someone like Bernie, who is a very respectable member of the community. And that brings us back to the two-tier justice. Can I just say, among the many people who've been in touch with me today is a woman called Maya Forstatter. You might have heard of her, extraordinary person who had founded Sex Matters, standing up for single-sex services, only women having access to women's spaces. And Maya got in touch and she said, "This happened to me too, Allison. Police wouldn't tell me which tweet it was. They called the complainant the victim. They spent a year investigating me, and now it has been referred to the Crown Prosecution Service." So this has been going on.
That's like an axe above her head, isn't it? It's a threat over her.
Yes, really horrible to have to live with that.
And she's a very prominent commentator, academic, author.
But for a tweet, Lim, for a tweet about a trans doctor. So I would say, where's the proportion? Now, Essex Police have responded to my article in The Telegraph and to The Telegraph's coverage. So it's only fair that you should say what they're saying.
Sure. So in relation to your case, Alison, Essex Police obviously on Planet Normal to defend themselves or to corroborate or respond to your account of what happened on your doorstep on Sunday morning. They've said in writing, "We're investigating a report passed to us by another force. The report relates to a social media post subsequently removed. An investigation is now being carried out under Section 17 of the Public Order Act. As part of that, officers attended an address on Sunday, November the 10th, to invite a woman to attend a voluntary interview on the matter. The case, police sources suggest, is being treated as a criminal matter rather than a non-crime hate incident." And that's the statement from Essex Police. Alison, what do you think could happen here? How's this going to play out?
Well, I just want to say that to the best of my ability, I conveyed what had happened on the morning of Remembrance Sunday. And it wasn't inaccurate in the sense that the minute the police had left, I WhatsApped Toby Young, the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union and a good friend of Planet Normal, to tell Toby exactly what had happened. So my understanding was that it was a non-crime hate incident. I didn't hear them inviting me to an interview, and everything I said, the refusal to tell me what I'd said, the refusal to disclose who was accusing me, that's absolutely true. And that is borne out by what Maya Forstatter has told me. There are about 65 of these non-crime hate incidents being imposed on British people every day, according to the Free Speech Union. And it's a dirty secret. They don't want people to know, I don't think, or they're not happy that someone like me shines a light on what's going on. And most people who have what happened to me happen to them, don't have my platform, don't have the kind of backup I'm fortunate to have. So they sit quietly, fearful in their homes. It's very frightening when the police come into your lives. And most of us respect the police. We don't want to do anything to cause offence. So they've got a lot of frightened people who are now starting to speak out. They're ringing me, they're emailing me saying, "My God, that's exactly what happened to me." So I think I have lifted up the stone, and we have seen what happens when people are accused of things but not given any information that could help them defend themselves. I will, I think, go to attend a voluntary interview at the police station, if that's what I'm required to do. And a very excellent solicitor from the Free Speech Union will come with me. And maybe at that meeting, they will outline more of what I'm supposed to do. But the point I want to make, Liam, is that I don't agree with the premise of it. I believe in free speech. Clearly, that must have some limits. You can't go around inciting riot or whatever. But within, very generous, broad limits, people are allowed to make mistakes. People are allowed to hold opinions that Yvette Cooper doesn't agree with. I mean, I know that will come as a shock to some of the Labour government. But what I think is going on, and what Toby Young has said to me, is a lot of this stuff is a smokescreen for the imposition of a moral code being imposed on people like me who are centre-right, who don't go along, who don't think that racism is as bad as they claim, or indeed is the worst possible thing in the world. Because I think murdering people and sexual abuse and rape are more worthy of police time than someone like me who may or may not have slightly overstated, or I don't know what I did, but I don't think that these things should be crimes at all, right? So fundamentally, I'm going to be dragged into a process, and I disagree with the very premise of it.
Well, again, Essex Police and the representatives of the criminal justice system aren't here to defend themselves against what you've said, Alison. All I would say is that, judging by the Planet Normal inbox, the comments under the Telegraph's coverage of this episode, there's a tremendous amount of support out there for you, and many, many, many other people who've written to us to tell them that they have endured similar experiences.
But we'll keep listeners posted.
Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We learn so much from you, the citizens of Planet Normal.
Now we've had, you won't be surprised to hear, we've had a lot of Free the Pearson one emails. Gordon says,
Je suis Allison.
Just listen, mate, you're going to be visiting me in Belmarsh, bringing me some Marks and Spencer smoked salmon sandwiches. Gordon says, first, I sincerely hope Allison is okay after Sunday's knock on the door. Young or not, coppers on your doorstep is a disquieting experience. Second, what lousy luck personally for these young constables to have had to face La Pearson under full sail on a Sunday morning. But third, what great good fortune for the rest of us that it was you they picked on, Allison, thereby ensuring that the great British public hears about what is being done in our name. I sometimes wonder whether or how deeply our police feel committed to this stuff as individuals. Are they simply following orders, the unthinking commissars of wokery and censorship, as Allison described them, or, dismal thought, do they actually believe it? It seems to me that for us Brits, our visceral love of fair play matters almost more than freedom under the law. For one thing, it's a simpler, clearer notion, and unfairness gets our goat above all else. Nowhere more so, says Gordon, than up at the Arsenal most weeks as I contemplate life's occasional cruelty. More to the point, though, the egregious decision to penalise the young girl who recently misgendered her bearded opponent on the rugby field in a supposedly female competition would undoubtedly be condemned as unfair by everyone, even your Sunday morning visitors, Allison. So I always console myself with the belief that despite the tomfoolery that often passes for the legislative process, and no matter how absurdly its results are then applied, when you hear the words fair's fair, you can be pretty sure they were spoken by a Brit who knew, moreover, exactly what the words meant. All the best and good luck, Gordon.
This is from Simon. Dear Alison and Liam, I find your podcast a literal oasis of sanity in an ever-increasingly bizarre and worrying world. I'm incredibly grateful and admiring of both of you, and indeed some of your guests, not least Richard the Farmer and Tim Stanley, a standout in recent times. I'm writing today, however, says Simon, to say just how incredibly outraged I am at Alison's disgraceful treatment by the Essex Police, and to say, Allison, there are more people than you can possibly imagine who are supporting you. Words fail me, but sadly I'm not surprised. I've often wondered when these totalitarian apparatchiks would start coming for people like you, Brendan O'Neill, Douglas Murray, Julia Hartley-Brewer, Rod Little, and so many others who are brave enough to stand up and say it as it is. I intend to join the Free Speech Union today and then use some time to see how I might file an NCHI against the Chief Constable of Essex Police for this appalling behaviour. He's truly upset me, and surely in this snowflake world of ours, my feelings are more important than what he thinks should be done. It's not as if Essex Police are exactly hot on solving crimes. I'm afraid we're all in a fight now, a real fight for what we had, a fight for British values, a sense of fair play, a belief that right will win over in the end, a pride in being from this place, and the certainty we all stand together. All of it's under threat, but most of all, Allison, I'm sorry that you went through that horrifying and disgraceful intimidation. Shame on the police, and shame on anyone who doesn't come to your aid and give you their wholehearted support. All the best from Simon. And I say again, Essex Police aren't here to counter those views.
This is from David. I'm a Telegraph subscriber. I live in Cowbridge, beautiful Cowbridge in the Vale of Glamorgan. I know it well. I mention it only because I know you're Welsh, Allison. Very little shocks me these days, says David. However, your article in today's edition did. I agree with everything you say. And the fact that anyone in Essex Police thought it was reasonable to send 2 officers to your house on Remembrance Sunday should be the subject of a complaint to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. I served as a commissioned officer in the regular army for 4 years, followed by 22 years in the TA. I do not use social media, although members of my family use Facebook. I've come to the conclusion that platforms such as Twitter, X, are cesspits where anyone can say anything about any subject, including other people, without having any evidence to support their statements, claims, assertions. My advice to you would be to leave the platform, but that you may decide the risk is still worth taking to maintain your public profile. Please continue, both of you, Alison and Liam, to keep sticking it to Starmer, Reeves, Rain and Milliband, etc. I'm very worried about the damage they will inflict on our country, and I'm sure that there are millions of decent people who didn't bother to vote in July's general election who are really regretting it now. Best wishes, David.
There really are so many emails coming in supporting you, Alison. This is from Adrian. After Alison processes her understandable ordeal, I think they'll find they've bitten off more than they can chew here. She has the FSU on her side. She's a brilliant journalist and has 2 powerful platforms to serialise this debacle. I'm looking forward to this process, getting as much sunlight as possible. Best wishes from Adrian. And that's it from Planet Normal for this week, Alison. A special extended edition reflecting the Pearson episode as we show. You're going to be a Trivial Pursuit question pretty soon, co-pilot. As we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reason views. Email of the week, it's your turn.
Oh, they're all so nice, all my kind of things. I think that I am going to choose Gordon for his beautifully written email. So Gordon, do send us an email to Planet Normal and put mug winner in the subject area.
And send us your postal address, Gordon. You'll get that Planet Normal mug. And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal and the madness of Planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our producers Isabel Bajard, Elliot Lampitt, Cass Ho and Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.